World War III has never been closer than it is right now.
Что это будет в одном шаге от полномасштабной Третьей мировой войны.
We are already in World War III. You just have to know where to look. In today's video, you will learn how the new global conflict unfolds. First, let's establish who is fighting and why. On one side, the West, USA and NATO allies. On the other, Russia and China. Both sides bring other nations to the fold on secondary but no less important level. The West has grown complacent. Its superpower, the USA, is no longer willing to serve as the world's policeman, and the fact that many nations around the world feel forgotten has created a lot of resentment over the past decades. At the same time, both Russia and China have recovered from the underdevelopment and technological delay of decades past. They are extending their reach globally to obtain more power, influence, and precious resources. World War III, however, is not fought like the previous two. This war is far less about humans on the front lines. It's a more digitized war, fought in remote places where not everyone can see it. The Arctic and space are just as important, if not more, than Taiwan or Ukraine. The Ukraine war is only one battlefield of World War III. This is what economists and former US presidential advisor Pippa Malmgren has been writing and speaking about recently. We recommend some of her Substack articles in the description. Weaponizing food and energy prices is far more effective in hurting enemy countries and their civilian populations than any tank ever could. We can see that with the Ukraine war, how it impacted energy prices in Europe, and wheat supply and its prices in Africa. This hybrid warfare is fought in what the military calls gray zone. An article from the Atlantic Council defined it as a set of activities that occur between peace or cooperation and war or armed conflict. Gray zone activities are considered gradualist campaigns by state and non-state actors that combine non-military and quasi-military tools and fall below the threshold of armed conflict. They aim to thwart, destabilize, weaken, or attack an adversary, and they are often tailored towards the vulnerabilities of the target state. It is this grey nature that makes it difficult to establish an encompassing narrative. The world has evolved, but the media follows old rules. The stories are about dead and displaced humans, with verifiable reporting from journalists on site. Things have changed, though. First, the Cold War. Submarine cable cuts are probably not the first thing that comes to mind when anyone thinks of World War III, but they are in fact a big deal. On January 6, 2021, someone cut the Svalbard internet cable. Why is this important? And where is Svalbard? It's an island in the Arctic Circle that belongs to Norway, where, for instance, the world's seed vault is located. The Svalbard cable is important because it's the fastest internet connection on the planet. Practically all high-altitude satellites, commercial, military, or international space station, connect to Earth at Svalbard. It means taking out all satellite-based connectivity, which means, for instance, taking out missiles guiding systems. If you're thinking, well, how does this impact my life? It means taking out your ability to use GPS. Internet and Wi-Fi depend on these cables, and there have been many more incidents like this. October 2022. The underwater cable between the Shetland Islands in Scotland and the Faroe Islands was cut. This cable is critical to monitor if Russian submarines are transporting nuclear weapons, at a moment in history where Russia is threatening to use nuclear weapons. Shortly after, someone cut the Marseille cable. This one connects the USA, Europe, and Asia. Our internet-based world is dependent on satellite connections. Fortunately, there's either redundancy, the duplication of critical components or functions of a system with the goal of increasing its reliability, or backup systems in place. Still, it was a deliberate attack that, under normal circumstances, would warrant a declaration of war. But due to the nature of modern warfare, no one is willing to make accusations to avoid direct confrontation. After all, the damage can be offset and repaired, and justifying to the public going to war over an internet cable cut would be very difficult. On February 2nd and 8th, 2023, the Matsu cable that connects Taiwan to the world was also cut. Just like the communications cable between Finland and Estonia in October 2023, almost at the same time as the gas pipeline between both countries. You can also include, of course, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline blow-up. This is only half of the war in a cold place. A war of communication. So far, we've been looking down. Now, it's time to look up, to space. Space is an extension of the sea and the commanding heights of modern warfare. Establishing a dominant position on the moon and in higher orbits is paramount. Whether military or civilian, our world is dependent on satellite communication. Mess with satellites, and you mess with communication. That's what Russia or China are looking for when they destroy their own satellites, intentionally.
The Russians they blew up their own military satellites. It was like a 4,000-pound machine, and they smashed it to smithereens. And everybody shrugs, but what that really is about is a denial of access, because it creates this massive debris field. They call it the Kessler effect, and it's described as razor blades in a washing machine. And it's partly what forced the International Space Station to almost have to evacuate now a couple of times. And why? Because we're battling out over who gets to dominate which orbits.
A more advanced and blunt way of engaging in space warfare is through automated robotics.
There was an incident in 2021 where the Chinese took their Shijian-21 satellite, which is equipped with robotic arms, which only the United States has otherwise. And basically they dropped this satellite out of one orbit and into another and grabbed one of their own aging weather satellites and literally hurled it into what they call the dead zone. In other words, it's gone. It's in outer space somewhere and nobody will ever hear from it again. Now, that event was very important from a US and NATO perspective because it indicated that we can come along and grab any of your satellites and literally render them useless.
Communication is not the only topic of contention in space, because geopolitics will always be geopolitics, whether it's on Earth or in space. A perennial topic is energy. Space is not the next frontier. It's another setting in two very important issues: space-based solar power and the return to the moon. Space-based solar power can be used as an energy source or as a military weapon. The idea is to use a special kind of mirror to convert the sun's rays into electrical energy, powering a microwave transmitter or laser emitter and transmitting it to Earth. This technology is not new in its conception, and steps are being taken to bring it to reality in a feasible way. If successful, it will revolutionize the energy sector so much that Saudi Arabia has shown interest in it, since it can directly impact its hydrocarbon-based economy and geopolitical importance in the world. It became even more important after Russia invaded Ukraine, interfering with energy markets. The return to the moon involves a strategic advantage and a precious resource. The strategic advantage is about who builds a space station on the moon first, achieving a superior location over everyone else. The precious resource is helium-3. Nuclear fusion is one of the next steps in producing clean and abundant energy. The moon has a lot of helium-3, vital for the nuclear fusion process. The moon's role is to stay, extract, and launch from. Space-based solar will provide the power to do it. It doesn't stop here when it comes to important ventures. The semiconductor industry, which impacts geopolitics on Earth, is one example. Chip production can take place in space in a cheaper and cleaner way. In the pharmaceutical industry, production quality can increase dramatically in a zero-gravity environment. This is the war fought in the cold, and it's only half of World War III. Next is the war fought in the hot zones. First, a Cold War, Africa and the Pacific. In Africa, Russia is capitalizing on security issues, poverty, and anti-French sentiment in the Sahel.
6 countries in West and Central Africa have had military takeovers since 2020, and they're all former French colonies.
The Russians are working to gain access to critical resources, acting as liberators from French neocolonialism and security guarantors from Islamic terrorism. China also has a significant presence in Africa. In the Pacific, there's a massive military buildup underway by China, acquiring influence across the island chain or building islands from scratch. The USA has responded by reclaiming an important World War II airfield on an island north of Guam called Tinian. Guam is also seeing increasing US military development. Finally, the Israel-Hamas conflict is another war theater, a hot war, one that can easily spill over to the rest of the Middle East, but also to Europe, due to the large number of immigrant-born or descendant populations. Russia and Iran can and will certainly try to capitalize on this. This is the way modern warfare is and will be conducted, with technology doing most of the work. Interestingly enough, fewer soldiers will be needed, but more civilians will be involved due to the reach of these acts of aggression. A satellite taken out, an internet communications cable cut, or creating food and energy price inflation. Just like strategic real estate purchases, technological and financial disputes, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, or mercenary operations, we should expect more of these little things to which barely anyone pays attention. Until they have trouble with their Wi-Fi or their grocery shopping becomes more expensive. What about nuclear confrontation? That will always be a threat, perhaps even more so with AI, but at the end of the day, no one really wants to be responsible for the end of the world. Some world leaders, at best, want to seem crazy, and the more threatened someone feels, the bigger the threats. Naturally, this is not meant to downplay the risk of nuclear confrontation. Lastly, if things were to collapse into mutual destruction, it would happen much faster than anything we're used to, thanks to technological developments like hypersonic weapons. Therefore, nations focus on de-escalation before everything breaks down irreversibly in a matter of minutes instead of days or weeks. This is World War III, and we are living through it. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.